Today I'm showing you how to make the viral sourdough croissant loaf the absolute easiest way possible, and with the addition of chocolate chips. It's even better. Welcome y'all to Robin on the Farm. To make this chocolate chip sourdough croissant bread, I'm going to use my basic recipe for sourdough bread. This is my super simple, beginner-friendly, uncomplicated way to make sourdough bread, and it really is the easiest way to make a really good loaf of sourdough bread. Now, I'm going to use this base recipe, but then I'm going to add some additions to this recipe. I'm going to add some chocolate chips, and I'm going to add some butter. And what you get is this amazing chocolate chip croissant, flaky, buttery, chocolatey sourdough bread, and it is so delicious. If you're new to sourdough or your starter is struggling and you can't quite get it as strong as you want it, I have my really strong, good sourdough starters freeze-dried and available on my website. I have Hester and Millie. Hester's my unbleached flour sourdough starter. Millie is my fresh milled flour sourdough starter. You can get these, reconstitute them, and in a few days you could be making bread with them. If you feed them and maintain them, you can keep these going for your entire life, and you can make so much sourdough with these. So those are on my website, robinonthefarm.com. So let's just get started on the recipe. We are gonna use 1/3 cup or 85 grams of this sourdough starter. This is my sourdough starter Hester. So I'm just gonna put that right on into the bowl. Into that, I'm gonna add 200 grams or 3/4 cup of room temperature water. So I'm just gonna put that right on in there. Now, if you have some filtered water or unchlorinated water, that is best to use whenever you're making sourdough bread. So that's what I recommend. So just give this a good mix until your sourdough starter is all mixed into your water. This is just gonna help our dough come together a lot easier. Now I'm gonna add 2.5 cups of flour. That is 325 grams of flour. Now you can use all-purpose flour, you can use bread flour. Today I'm just using all-purpose flour. I kind of flip back and forth. I think they both turn out great. So you can use whichever one you want to use. So 2.5 cups or 325 grams. Let's put that right on into your bowl. And next we want some salt. I really like this Redmond's Real Salt. This is an ancient fine sea salt from North America that I am just really pleased with. I really like it. So I'm gonna use 1.5 teaspoons or 8 grams of this salt. But you can use pink Himalayan sea salt. You can use white iodized table salt. It really doesn't matter. But definitely add the salt. Don't forget the salt. Bread is terrible without salt. So 1.5 teaspoons or 8 grams. And those are all of our ingredients so far. I'm gonna give this a really good mix. What I like to do is I like to use my spurtle and I like to mix this really well. This is gonna be a really thick dough. So I mix it as well as I can, and then I usually use my hands and kind of knead the rest together just for a minute until it comes together into a nice shaggy ball of dough. So you can see my dough. It's definitely shaggy and kind of hard to work together. Now you can definitely use a stand mixer if you'd rather do that. If this is a little bit too hard on your body, then go ahead and use a stand mixer. But for me, sometimes it's easier just to get out a bowl and a spurtle and start mixing it. But now I'm gonna go ahead and get in there with my hands. You can see what the dough looks like right now. I'm just gonna get in there and just kind of work this ball of dough together. I'm gonna try to get all of the dry flour out from the bottom of the bowl. Just kind of squeeze it and flip it because the middle of this dough is wetter than the outside right now. Okay, I just worked this ball of dough for about 45 seconds in my bowl, and look how good this ball of dough looks. It's come together really nicely. It's a really nice shaggy ball of dough. So now it's time for the bulk ferment. Now I'm gonna throw this back into my bowl. I'm gonna cover it with some saran wrap so that this dough doesn't dry out. And I'm gonna let this bulk ferment on my countertop from 3 to 12 hours. Now, I know that's a really long time, but this recipe works whether you do it for 3 hours or for 12 hours. What I like to do is make this fit into my day. Sometimes I'll let it do an overnight bulk ferment and it's closer to 10 to 12 hours. Sometimes I want this ready in time for dinner and only have a few hours to let it bulk ferment. So you get to choose how you want it. Now, ideally, you'll want your dough to have risen and expanded. But really, for this recipe, sometimes when it's closer to 3 hours, it hasn't done much. And sometimes when it's closer to 12 hours, it's really big and puffy. And I really don't see that much of a difference in my bread. So you get to experiment with that. I'm gonna let this bulk ferment on my countertop. It'll probably be about 8 to 10 hours, and then I'll show it to you then. And then it'll be time to add our inclusions of butter and chocolate chips to turn this simple sourdough bread into a chocolate chip croissant sourdough bread. Oh, it is divine. I can't wait for you to taste it. Okay, my dough has been bulk fermenting on the countertop for about 8 hours. Now you can see that it's risen, it's expanded, it's puffy, it looks great. Now this recipe, you can go anywhere from 3 hours to 12 hours with your bulk ferment. If you go closer to 3 hours, it's not gonna be this risen or expanded. If you go closer to 12 hours, it might be a little bit bigger than this, but this looks great. Now, don't worry if yours isn't risen this much. If you go closer to 3 hours, this recipe still works with kind of some puny dough. So this will work great. Super easy sourdough recipe. Now we're gonna do 3 steps in one. We're gonna do 1 set of stretch and folds, we're gonna add our inclusions, and we're gonna shape the dough all at one time. So that's why this recipe is so simple. So for this recipe, I'm gonna add the inclusion of 1 stick of butter, and I'm also gonna add a 1/2 cup of chocolate chips. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. I have put this stick of butter in the freezer for just a little while. I think it just kind of helps it to grate a little bit easier, but sometimes I pull it straight from the fridge and I grate it, and sometimes I put it in the freezer for just about 10 minutes. But this one's been in the freezer just for a little bit, and it's still nice and easy to grate, so that's good. So I'm gonna grate this whole entire stick of butter. This is about 113 grams of butter, or a 1/2 cup. Okay, I have my entire stick of butter grated on top of my dough. Now I'm gonna use a 1/2 cup of chocolate chips. These are just some Nestle semi-sweet chocolate chips, but I have made this with the good Ghirardelli 60% cocoa. I've made this with milk chocolate chips. You can't go wrong with any kind of chocolate, in my opinion. So add whatever kind of chocolate chips you want to add. Now I'm just going to kind of spread this all over this butter. And it really doesn't matter if you add your chocolate chips or your butter first. It doesn't make a difference. Now I'm going to do 1 really simple set of stretch and folds, and this is going to just help develop the gluten in our loaf. So I'm going to grab my dough from far down in the bowl, and I'm going to pull up my dough, and you can see it's really stretchy and nice. And I'm going to pull the dough over to the side. It does help if your hands are wet, but I forgot to do that today. But I'm going to just pull my dough up from the side and stretch it and fold it over. That's why it's called a stretch and fold. And I want to incorporate all of these inclusions into the middle of the loaf. So pull it up, stretch it over. Now, as I do this, the gluten is developing. This is going from a really stretchy dough that has no shape whatsoever, and I can feel that the dough is changing already as I do this. It's getting much more easier to manage. It's becoming tighter. So as you can see, we've added our inclusions, we've done our set of stretch and folds, and we've shaped our dough into a really nice round ball of dough. Now I like to just kind of pick it up and kind of push the bottom together. Just make sure you have a really nice round ball of dough. And there we go. That looks exactly right. Now I'm going to put this back into the bowl. I'm going to cover it up with the saran wrap again, and I'm going to pop this in the fridge anywhere from an hour to overnight. You can actually leave this in the fridge for several days before you bake it if that's what you want to do, but I'm going to just leave this in the fridge for an hour or two, and then I'm going to bake it. My dough has been resting in the fridge for about 2 hours, and now it's time to score the dough. I get my daughter to do this for me because she's way more creative and artistic than I am, and she just really likes to do this part. So she's sprinkling a little bit of flour on top of the dough. This is usually rice flour, but you can also use all-purpose flour. And she's using a bread lahm to score the dough. When you score your dough, you want to make slashes or cuts in your dough about 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep. This allows steam to escape and your bread to rise and expand during baking so that it doesn't burst. So it's very practical, but it's also decorative and pretty. This is an ancient practice, and there are actually Egyptian hieroglyphs that show what look like people scoring round loaves of dough with a blade. So isn't that incredible? And in the Middle Ages, when community ovens were used to bake bread, the score actually served to identify whose loaves belonged to who so that everybody got their own bread back. Isn't that so cool? Can you tell I'm a homeschool mom? So be sure to score your bread. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. It just needs to serve that purpose of helping your bread to rise and not burst during the baking process. Now that this loaf is scored, it's time to throw it in the oven to bake. I like to do a cold bake. So I put my dough into a cold Dutch oven, I put the lid on, and then I put the Dutch oven into a cold oven. I also like to put a cookie sheet on the rack under my Dutch oven. This will help your crust not get too hard and help prevent it from burning. Then I turn my oven on to 450 degrees, and I let this bake for 50 minutes. Then I take the lid off and get a little sneak peek of my bread. Then I turn the oven down to 425 degrees. And then I let my bread just continue baking and brown up for about 5 to 10 minutes. And our bread is done. Look how wonderful it looks. Now, sometimes with this croissant loaf, you will have some butter pull to the bottom of your Dutch oven, and that is okay. Go ahead and get your bread out of the Dutch oven as soon as you get it out of the oven to prevent the bottom from getting too hard or getting a little bit too brown. Put it on a cooling rack and let it cool for a little bit. You don't want to cut into it too early or you might have a gummy interior. But go ahead and admire your loaf. Check out that beautiful crust that's buttery and flaky and just like a croissant. Now, I didn't let mine cool all the way. I am ready to cut into this and take a bite of this bread. So I'm expecting my chocolate chips to still be a little bit melty inside. Let's take a look at this. Oh my goodness, look how good this chocolate chip croissant sourdough loaf looks. This looks incredible. I love the flaky crust and also the layers all throughout the bread. Oh, I gotta take a little bite of this. Oh my goodness, it is so good. It is so soft, it's chocolatey. The flavors just go together so well. I couldn't help myself. I just ate 3 slices of that bread and I could not stop, so I had to make myself put it away. These are beeswax bread bags that my daughters and I made together. They're eco-friendly, sustainable, and a healthy way to store your bread. They're on my website, robinonthefarm.com. I'll also have the printable recipe for this delicious chocolate chip sourdough croissant bread. I hope you'll give this one a try. It is delicious. Thank you so much for being here with me on Robin on the Farm. I will see you next time.
Robin's in the kitchen, dough beneath her hands, wheat from the fields and eggs from her land. Sunlight through the window, a warm golden glow. She's working hard to make that dough. With flour on her apron, loving each need,